Hi there, welcome. This is English 122, Pikes Peak Community College, the online section. This is week 12. Our final week of lecture material this week and next week will be the revision and editing process. Hopefully you're at that stage. If not, finalizing your drafts for your final paper. That final paper will be due on December 13th, and so for the next 2 weeks, you don't have any reading assignments. You just have the writing and drafting, researching, and editing processes. For those of you who are interested in peer reviewing, I put up some information on the website on the D2L website under the discussion board, under the Unit 4 forum. There's a topic that says peer review. Now, this is a completely optional. You're not required to participate if you don't wish to. If you do want to engage in the peer review process, I think you'll find it enjoyable and a good, valuable learning experience that you can carry on in all of your work life, your writing, and your work life. The peer review process is twofold. If you want to exchange papers with another student and say, I need help with this whole paper, I need feedback on everything, or I just want eyes on what my thesis is doing. Are you seeing strengths or weaknesses I can particularly identify to work on? If you can identify what you'd like feedback on, and if you are able to read somebody's paper, if you're able to find the time to give them feedback, just let me know by posting a thread on the discussion board, and the instructions are on the discussion board more specifically about what we're looking for. But basically, you just email me your draft so that we keep your email address private and your peer reviewer's email address private. The review could be anonymous if you'd like, or if you don't mind using your name, that's fine. Just let me know the parameters of how you'd like it to be handled, and if you are able to do a peer review as well. Some of the things that I wanted to put up on the website this week, I'll be adding a revision checklist that I found from Penn State University, their graduate writing center. It's a pretty comprehensive, a 15-page document that details the steps for revision more thoroughly. And I'll give you a brief lecture on that here. I have some information up on the website as well in a PowerPoint. Revision and editing, as I said just a little bit ago, I think is probably the strength of excellent writers, their ability to revise their work and to engage in that process of revision. And so we'll be talking about what revision and what editing are and the importance of those functions. Let me know if you have any questions moving into this final couple of weeks of class. I apologize for any errors or clarification issues, but everything should be up to date. I'll have your final grades for your annotated bibliography and for your rhetorical analyses. Those will be posted by the beginning of this week, maybe Tuesday at the latest, so you'll have that information. So moving into the specifics of revision and editing, in my other job, my full-time job, I work as a policy writer, a policy analyst advisor for the Colorado State Patrol, and part of that job is to revise and edit policies that have already been written and in place. And we do revisions of the policies continually, but while you're doing those policy revisions, you're taking a document that has already been formed by generally multiple hands over the course of many years, and you are adding to that based on feedback from the experts that the chief requests to fill in, to complete this document revision process. But while I'm doing these revisions, a couple of things come into mind when I first look at the process. I have to read the document as it is. And so that folds into what we're talking about with the revision process. I have to see exactly what is there. So I have to revise. Revise means to re-see, revision. So looking at it with fresh eyes. So I have to see what's actually there, not what I hope is there, but what is actually there. And then I have to make some decisions. I have to decide, do I want to try to keep the content as pure as possible, which is exactly for the purpose of law enforcement policy. It has to stay as intact as possible, or the revisions won't be signed off by the executive command staff. But I also have to look at closing as many loopholes of ambiguity of language, and sometimes that involves just looking for comma errors, something that's simple. Sometimes a comma can be the difference between someone keeping their job or not keeping their job, and I know that sounds dramatic, but when you're looking at policies as guidelines for employment or for legal status, then you need to look at that level and you have to be correct. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to take the time to revise, to re-see what's on there. The editing process is laborious. It can be easy, it can be cumbersome, but the revision process is the critical one because you're looking at what is there and what is expected to be there. So you're imagining what should be there. You have the set of criteria, the format, the formula, so to speak, of what should be there, and you are actually looking at what is there. So while I'm going through that revision process at work, one of the things I keep thinking is if something is very well written in place, there's very little I have to do other than to say I'm folding in the new information, or I'm changing the new information to make it exactly what the new policy is reflecting, or that change in policy reflects. If I have to do a lot of work about reforming sentences so that they're coherent or complete sentences, if I have to spend a lot of time making that document look intelligent, then the thing that starts thinking in the back of my head is a line from the movie Tombstone, and I wish that we had had the chance to have an in-person class because I love teaching that film for critical analysis purposes. But one of the lines in it is when Johnny Ringo says to one of the posse, "You ignorant wretch," and that phrase keeps popping into my head while I'm reading, as a reader, someone else's work that is not revised. I keep thinking, "You ignorant wretch," and it doesn't reflect whether that person is truly ignorant. It's just how their writing has appeared. So one of the tenets about writing, we talked about this on the very first discussion board, is what do you expect as a reader from your author? What is that relationship between audience and author? And the same comes in the end of your writing process. We come full circle with this lecture, this end of course, revision and editing. You, as a writer now, fold into the role of the writing situation where you turn your material over to someone to read, and then they are assessing with those eyes, who are you as an author? What are their expectations of you? So remember, we talked throughout the semester about writing to others as you would have them write unto you. You have to keep that in mind. And so in your revision process, you shift roles back to the critical analyst again, the reader. So you are the writer of a document that now you have to read. And it's an empowering exercise, and it can be intimidating because sometimes when you finally get that cursor to stop moving, all you want to do is save that thing and send it. And that is the hardest temptation, is to go back and say, I need to sit for a few hours, sometimes a couple of days, and then I'll go back and see what's actually there. Sometimes it's exciting and sometimes it's terrifying, and sometimes it's both combinations. So when you're revising, you're switching your roles to actually read your paper. And you want to start with that writing situation we talked about at the beginning of the semester. And of course, your genre is going to be, for this final assignment, the genre is an extended researched argument. It's not a topic paper that is a research project where you gather research to present facts. You are extending an argument and supporting it with research. That is the intent. So you have to go back and think about, does this paper accomplish that generic expectation, does it effectively do that? Or is it ineffective in some way? If you're finding there is a gap in the generic expectation and what you have, then you need to go back and address those flaws. And sometimes that's the harder part of converting an argument into an argument rather than just as a topic that's presented. Part of that writing situation, what is your purpose? Are you trying to persuade someone? Is your so what an appeal that needs persuasion? You need to convince your audience to just or do you need them to think or act differently to join the conversation? Is your purpose to educate? Is your purpose to persuade and educate? Is there a mixture in there? You need to be able to identify what your purpose is, going back into those ideas about who your audience is. Obviously, I'm your audience, but also think about what do you want this paper to be doing? So you have to imagine an audience other than me. Imagine who, if you were to present your paper in a TED Talk, for example, who would that audience be? Where would you be presenting this information or this argument? What do you hope to achieve? What is your purpose? What is the subject? What is the audience? And then think about the context. If you have contextualized too broadly, and sometimes I try not to be harsh about it, I mean, in those basic argument papers, sometimes it was too big. You can't possibly argue something that goes from the beginning of time to now. That's an unidentifiable time range, or even since the beginning of recorded time. That's at least 2,000 years. Can you account for 2,000 years in the space of a 6-page paper? No, it would take your lifetime to write that much, and you wouldn't still be able to do it effectively. So manage it in chunks that are appropriate, because context sets up expectations. It sets your thesis. It's the T-ball stand for your thesis. And it helps your audience understand where they are and where you are going. So it not only sets up your thesis, but it anticipates your so what. So that's why we ask to recontextualize too, to remind your reader at the end of your paper, this is where we are and this is what I need you to do. So context matters, especially when you're doing the writing situation. You have to go through that process. Did you put too much in? Narrow it down. Is it not identified enough? Add some more in. But really look at that context. One of the things you can ask your outside readers, your peer reviewers, or if you just have a friend or a relative, a loved one who can look over your paper, if they don't have a lot of time, you can just ask them, do you understand the context for this argument that I'm trying to make? If they don't understand how you've placed and determined the conversation you are joining, or the problem that you are addressing, trying to argue through, then you need to identify where the context is missing and address it that way. Sometimes that's the flaw, is not in your argument, but in the context. It's not clear. Sometimes your argument is so thin, but your context is great. So you also have to look at that balance. Context also sets up the expectation of your audience of what your chops will be as a writer. If you articulate your context well, sometimes your flaw in your thesis, your flaws in your writing are forgiven more readily because your contextual information is so strong. So you have to understand that context really matters and shapes your audience expectations. So when you finish through the writing situation in your own work, then you fully put on the analytic role and you're looking for that effectiveness and persuasiveness that we've talked about in our critical analyses. You want to be able to know your conversation that you're joining or the problem. Can you identify it just talking to somebody? So one of the things that happens in conferences, academic conferences, or in job talks that you give in academia is they'll ask you, for example, what is your dissertation about? What is your thesis about? What is your research about? And you need to be able to articulate very clearly in a very small space, this is the conversation I'm joining, this is the problem that I see, and this is my answer to it. So that's what that abstract processes we went through. Can you, through an abstraction of your abstract, can you identify articulately, succinctly, concisely, what is that conversation? What is that problem? If you can't, really go back and think about why can't I identify what the situation, what the conversation is, and then be prepared to look through for, are there any counter arguments that I didn't take into consideration? Or are there any voices that have changed since I started this process? If you're writing about political processes in the 21st century, a lot has changed since you started the abstract to when 2 months later and you're finishing up your draft. A lot has changed. Are there any counter arguments you need to tuck in? So another step in the revision process, and then I'll go into the specifics. Thinking about when you're reading the work, every word matters. Every word counts. If there are extra words that are stumbling you towards some kind of statement, take out the extra words because every word should count. It needs to count or you're wasting space. Remember, I'm not going to be counting word count. I'd like the papers to be 6 pages because that's what Pikes Peak asks us to look for, 6 to 8 pages. If you can get to 5.5 pages, I'm not going to jack you up and say you didn't get to 6. But if you got to 5.5 and it's well written and every word counts, you bet that's a good paper. If you got to page 12 and nothing counts, I don't know what you're saying, every word is not counting, it's just mumbling, it's going to be frustrating. So thinking about every word counting, think then too the relationship to the thesis. Every sentence in your paper should relate to that thesis in some way. Every sentence either has to have, this is functioning as a contextual sentence. This is functioning as a topic sentence. This is functioning as a thesis point. This is functioning as an evidence. This paragraph here is my conclusion, but this sentence within this conclusion paragraph is recontextualizing. This sentence is my so what. So every sentence has to have a relationship to your thesis, just as every paragraph has its own function in relation to the whole shape of your argument. So thinking about the function of each paragraph and of each word, each sentence at that level, is there a word that's jamming you up? Take it out, change it. If your verbs are sitting boringly, if they're just plopped on there doing nothing, go to a thesaurus and pull out a vibrant verb. Usually, if your paper is reading flat, you just need to amplify it with good verbs. Verbs, I can't overestimate how important verbifying, and that's making up a word, but to verb it up, that can amplify your authority and drive you through to finding that great so what. So now the details, the nuts and bolts of the revision process. And again, I'm going long and I apologize, but I cannot tell you how important revision and editing is. The formatting, where to begin. So you start looking at what your format is. You know what the formula is for thesis, claims, evidence, so what. But we extend it out. What kind of format is there? The title should be a hook title, should be interesting, should encapsulate your thesis and anticipate your so what in some way. You know when you find a great title. You also know when you find a snooze fest title. When you are looking at, like say you're in a bookstore and you're looking at these titles, what grabs you and why? What makes it fall flat and why? The ones that are playful, imaginative, but somehow manage to push all of those things together, the argument and the so what, and the playfulness of language. You know when you see a good title. Try to work on that title. Your hook opening. Do you capture your reader's attention with the title and then start in with from the dawn of time? Oh my gosh, no. Just keep that momentum from the hook title into your hook opening. Whatever your framing is, personal narrative works great, and interrogatory, ask your reader a question right off the bat. Great way to pull their attention, make them participate right away. You've already got their attention with your hook title. Keep their attention and make them participate. Context, we talked about that earlier in this lecture. Is it an adequate foundation for your problem and for your thesis? Does it set the stage for you to argue your play, which your thesis, your argument? Is your thesis tense, deep? Does it have places to go to get complicated when you add other voices in to complicate your thesis? Or is it flat? Does it make your audience go, okay? Or do they want to know more? Or do they want to scream at you, prove it? You want it to have some kind of depth to it so that there's a reason to engage. Is it also relevant to the context that you've set up? Can it identify clearly what problem, what conversation you are joining? Looking at your structure, if you reverse outline, do a bullet point of how you're going to say you have to go into a presentation and say, I'm going to do a quick presentation of my thesis and my bullet points are my thesis points. Those bullet points should translate to your topic sentences of each body paragraph. If you are leading your body paragraphs with evidence, you've inverted the sentence, you've inverted the structure of that paragraph, you've collapsed your coherent framework, and you've given authority to somebody else's voice to speak for you. So keep that structure. Bullet point with your thesis points, and they should be the beginning topic sentences of your argument. When you're doing that reverse outlining, what we're talking about is, can you pull out the points and do an outline of what your argument is without the decoration of claims evidence and reinterpretation, that kind of thing. You can just go through the thesis points. In your claims evidence and interpretation, do you have all three things there? Do you have evidence without a claim? Do you have evidence without interpretation? If you just say, as so-and-so says, and then leave it at that, well, what do you want me to do with it? And if you're going to give me the authority to do it as a reader, what you've done is you've told me that you don't have the strength to write and control. So if you give me the authority, I might just stop reading, or I might run away and say that's the complete ineffective argument right there. So what you want to do, you're setting up a task for your reader, but you have to make them buy in by keeping that control and authority. Interpret your evidence, but also set it up with a claim. Is the claim reflective of what the interpretation? They should kind of bookend, make a little sandwich. They call it sometimes the claim evidence sandwich, with the evidence in the big middle. Is the evidence meeting that CRAP test? We talked about that in using your sources. And then think about your voice should always should be the forefront. Should your tone, your authority should be foregrounding everything, including your use of evidence. If you need to cut down and turn your evidence into ellipses or prune it down, that's great. If you need to punctuate it through the course of several sentences, take the time to do that. If you let it just sit, I call it like bird poop right in the middle of your paper. Don't let the bird poop in your paper. Do something to guide your evidence in there so that it makes sense. It's not just plopped in there. Thinking about your framing. Does your frame move coherently so that you start your paragraph and you end your paragraph to anticipate that transition so that everything is coherent? Or do you have abrupt transitions? Generally, transitions are the hardest part to write, and that's usually what I ask people to think about in their revision process. So look at your transitions for smoothness. Easily fixed, and Purdue's OWL website has all of those signposts and the prepositional phrases that you can use to smooth out those transitions. But remember, your thesis point guides the unity, thesis point to thesis point, and that's how you should shape your transitions. Is the order of your evidence logical within the paragraph? is the order of your claim, is that logical within your paragraph? You have more than one claim. Within your paragraphs, are your thesis points ordered logically, or do you need to restructure them? Do you need to start out with a counterpoint, a counter argument, and then double down on your own? No, this is why I'm arguing this. Or can you say this, but some people say this, but I claim it again. How are you handling that counter argument? Or are you just tucking it in? Make sure that you're understanding your order. It's logically presented. It builds in momentum in whatever shape you're having it, whether it comes down to that pyramid, inverted pyramid, or if you're building outward, or if you're going flat, 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 flat. Make sure you're building momentum. Think about your sources. Have they passed that CRAP test? Are they reliable? Are they credible? Are they authoritative? Are they accurate? What is the purpose of their writing? Can you trust these sources? And can your reader identify your sources so that they can go back and follow it themselves? That's through the formatting issue, and that will be part of the editing. And then finally, the things that I like the best: read your paper out loud. Read it out loud in the strangest accents you can find so that you can actually hear what's on the paper, not what you think is on the paper. You can ask for outside eyes to help you with that too if you're not comfortable with it, but even if you're mumbling the paper silently to yourself, make sure you're really listening to your paper and not what you think you have. Finally, in the revision process is go back and look at the assignment prompt. Does your paper match what the assignment asks for? Some people will jam you up like crazy. I mean, some professors will just say, no, I asked for 6,000 words and you gave me 5,999 and you fail the assignment. I'm not that way, but this particular assignment, we need to have 6 pages minimum, 6 to 8 pages for Pikes Peak's purposes because it's part of the 122 assessment project for the college, and it needs to have 5 sources, 2 of which must be peer-reviewed. If you need help understanding what that means, send me an email and we'll work through it, but those are the minimums of this assignment, and it's for Pikes Peak's purposes as well as mine. There is a grading rubric that I put up under Unit 4 that I use to fill in how I grade your paper. And simple, clear categories of: do you have a hook title? Do you have the sources documented? Do you have the minimum number of sources? And then you'll also see a rubric under the rubrics tab that Pikes Peak put in of what they're looking for. And I do a separate rubric for them, an assessment of 1 through 4 based on your paper. But that's how you're graded. So look at that last little step in your revision process. And again, I'll put up other things up on the website, the Penn State graduate writing document, and then I'll put a link on there from Purdue's OWL website on revision process. The last thing we're talking about tonight is editing. Editing is the technical details, the commas, the sentence fragments. Sentence fragments are easy to correct. I mean, run-ons are easy to correct. We are so involved in social media and texting as communication tools that it's very easy to forget the rules, the formal rules of sentences. And I don't lose my mind, some people will, but just be aware of this particular genre of writing needs to match those conventions, those standard language conventions for punctuation and editing. So review those. I have a sheet that I wrote on document on run-ons and fragments. You'll see that on Purdue OWL. The first point of editing is do a spell check on your Word program. When you do a spell check, it will pick up anything that's redlined. It has a red line under it. Anything that's got a blue line, anything with a green line. The red lines means that there's a spelling error. The blue lines mean that there's a possible grammatical error. And the green lines generally mean, I don't know what this is doing. I don't recognize this word. I don't recognize what language this is. And if you don't do that spell check and you turn in that paper and I see a lot of red lines, the first thing I think of is you didn't edit your paper. And so what is my impression of your authority and control? May just be a formatting issue, but you want to make sure by previewing your document, not that you're printing it out because we're not in person class, but you can still do a print preview to see what would look like when you upload your paper into the Dropbox. And you can also look at your paper in the Dropbox. If you see those problems, just resubmit the assignment and just put a note, hey, this has the corrections on it. Don't always rely on spell check to get everything correct, because sometimes you have those homophones where this is the word I meant, theirs, and spell check didn't catch there was an error, but you might be using it incorrectly. Grammarly.com is a great source to also use. A lot of students use Grammarly, and there's nothing wrong with that website. It's free to use at this time, so take advantage of that. Take advantage of the Learning Commons. They have tutors available. They're working remotely, but they're happy to help as well. Send something to me if you have a question. Read each sentence as its own discrete unit to make sure that you have a subject and a verb in there. That's how to check for all of those editing mistakes, punctuation mistakes. So if you're reading a paper, take each sentence out on its own. Does this have a complete subject, verb, object? If it doesn't, then you got to fix the punctuation. You have the tools. Purdue's OWL is the greatest source to go look for those punctuation errors, or any kind of, the Little Brown Handbook, if you have that still. Those kind of things matter. You can just even do a quick Google search on how do I punctuate a sentence. The information is available. You're looking too for the formatting. Are all your citations correct? Are they in order? Are they following the same format? Are you mixing up MLA, APA, and Chicago? Or are you following the same formatting? Remember, in this class, as long as you use one is great. I'm not asking you to only use MLA. Use the one you're most comfortable with, but make sure you're formatting correctly across all of those items within that format. If you're using APA, I expect to have a title page and a references page. If you're using Chicago, I expect a bibliography, either footnotes or endnotes. If you're using MLA, I expect to see a works cited page. And all those things have their own formatting issues too. Do you have it aligned correctly? Are they the spacings correct? Are the indents correct? Are the punctuation marks correct? Look at those things on Purdue's OWL website, and they will tell you exactly what the formatting is, and Word program will do that as well. Last thing I wanted to tell you about in Word is if you have a name, a formal name, you can put that in your find function in your Word document, in your Word program. Look to make sure that every time you spell that word that is correct. So I had a paper a student wrote on Dr. Seuss, and the first time they spelled Seuss S-E-U-S-S, which is correct, and every other time was spelled S-U-E-S-S, which is incorrect. The way they could have handled that is to plug into the find function S-E-U-S-S and find all, or replace all. So go through those processes, take the time to use the tools in your program to help you. And then the last thing to look at is, do you have your name on your paper? Do you have my name on the paper correctly in your header? Do you have the title page on there? If you have a title page, do you have page numbers? So put all those things in there, because all those things equal me not saying, you ignorant wretch. So I don't want to read a paper and go, oh my God, you ignorant wretch. I want to leap up and down and say, yes, I will do exactly what your so what commands me to do. So that's all I have, and it's been a great pleasure working with you. Let me know what I can do to help you. We've got 2 more weeks and then you're done. You can go celebrate. Hope you had a wonderful Thanksgiving, and I look forward to responding to any questions you have. Take good care.